Chairman Kensky, we're ready. Senator Anderson.
Here.
Senator Carew.
Here.
Senator Nethercott. Senator Salazar. And Chairman Kensky. You have a quorum.
It turns out that was not read in. So we will not be hearing that today. I will reschedule that probably for Thursday. So watch the announcements if that's a bill of interest. So the first bill up for our consideration will be Senate File 57, State Held Drainage District Bonds. And do we have, it's pretty straightforward. I think we can just go through it. This is basically a write-off of $24,000 of bad debt that's been on the books since, I think, 1931. So it's pretty pro forma. And I'm trying to remember who we assigned to carry this on the floor. Okay, that was, oh, I remember, Mike, you volunteered for this one. Okay. Okay. So that's Senate File 57. Do we have any members of the public here to testify on Senate File 57? Okay, I'll close public comment. It's to the committee. Discussion?
Second.
Bill's been moved and seconded. Discussion? Hearing none, clerk will call the roll.
Senator Anderson.
Aye.
Senator Carew.
Aye.
And Senator Nethercott.
Aye.
And Senator Salazar.
Aye.
And Chairman Kensky.
Aye.
5 ayes, 2 pass.
And that'll be Senator Giroux. The next bill for our consideration is Senate Joint Resolution 1, amending Wyoming's Act of Admission for leases and earnings. And while it appears to be fairly long in terms of the whereases, the intent is to give greater latitude for the investments of the Common School Public Land Fund for a greater long-term return. So if you turn to page 5, you'll see the essence of it, where what's being struck out in the constitutional amendment is the words interest, and that's being changed to earnings. Originally, these funds, as I understand it, contained only bonds. And now we have capital gains and in addition to dividends and interest. And I'm looking at what was struck out here. Okay, this is talks about leasing and leases that shall not exceed 10 years. This simply gives greater latitude to the legislature in terms of leasing out the state lands. And I think that is pretty much it, but we have to actually amend our act of admission in order to secure that sort of flexibility. Again, on page 6, we strike out interest and substitute earnings, page 6, line 7. And then page 7, line 3, again, we strike out income and put in earnings to reflect the fact that we need greater latitude in the management of these funds now that they hold a much larger portfolio. Is there anybody here to testify on, anybody from the public to testify on Senate Joint Resolution 1? Anyone? Hearing nothing, I'll close. It's been moved and seconded. Discussion? Senator Giroux.
Question, Mr. Chairman, I think it was on, you were referencing page 5 about. Sorry. Mr. Chairman, you were referencing page 5
Yes, sir.
on the leasing. And I see where it's the stricken language, lease shall not exceed 10 years. But where is it talk about the legislature having authority to lease it longer? It just, that since that's stricken out, that's just inherent.
So Senator Giroux, the subsequent sentence, which is underlined, is language added, lands granted under this act for educational purpose may be leased in accordance with state law. So it's opening it up to broader than mineral grazing and ag. And then it contemplates, I believe, something greater than 10 years in the appropriate circumstance.
If I can follow up.
Please.
And so I take it then OSLI promulgates rules on that?
I believe so. Once, assuming this becomes law, then we would have to act as a legislature. And OSLI then would swing into action with regulations. Senator
Thank you, Mr.
Netherton.
Chairman.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, does this have to be a resolution and the public votes on it? Is this, or can we do this? Or does it have to go to a public vote?
This actually has to go to the US Congress to modify our act of admission. So page 4 at the very bottom, that we're asking the members of the Wyoming's congressional delegation and Congress to introduce legislation that makes these changes to our act of admission.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to Senator Guru's question and a little sidebar we were having over here. Whereas I think this bill draft is drafted correctly for amending our act of admission. Senator Guru has additional concerns, which in my view may warrant another type of bill draft or other type of amendment somewhere else concerning length of time to limit leases by the Office of State Lands. And so he's looking for additional information on that. I don't know if it's possible or if the chairman would entertain us learning a little bit more about who has the power to determine the length of those leases.
Well, I think we can do that. We can. Senator Hicks. Turn your mic on, please, Larry.
That question, Senator Hicks, and this was a joint appropriations bill that we worked on, but just to give you a little bit of background on this, and I think Senator Chairman Kinski talked, several states have already done this. Idaho was one, and I can't remember if it was Utah or New Mexico, but one of those. And the purpose for that is because of the limitations where it uses the word interest. As the chairman has indicated, what we want to do is be able to use all those investment tools that are out there now that didn't exist before. So the other states did this for the purposes for being able to make investments with higher rate of returns to help fund the public school system. This language was modeled after some of the stuff in Idaho. The discussion specifically about the duration of the state leases is to try to derive a longer or a better rate of return. So if you have an opportunity to do a state lease or maybe a cell tower or some other component of that, assurances for businesses will provide an opportunity to maybe derive a higher lease rate for those businesses. And that's the language. That was the purpose of putting that language in there. And then the state land board, if this was adopted, would have the discretion of what the term and the length of those leases are, as they currently do now, but under the current active enabling act, they're limited to 10 years and 10 years old. I hope, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions.
Well, I think Senator Grew that the 10 years is of concern to you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I remember Mr. Majority Floor Leader, I'm the guy that climbs into A&I's tree about 20-year leases that, that seem kind of odd to me on their price and all that. And so getting us stuck in leases one way or the other. So that's why, and when the good chairman just said was in his explanation that we would still decide that, there's nothing in here that says we decide that. So that's why I was wondering who decides if someone gets a 20-year lease, if a 20-year grazing lease at a price today, 10 years from now, all of a sudden is a terrible price and we're stuck with it. And so that's what I was wondering. Are we going to be talking to OSLI about promulgating rules on that? Or are we going to take that up at another time and place?
Senator Grew, it says in accordance with state law, so that would fall to us. That would fall to us to determine, but I think we've got plenty of time to act because it's going to take a while for Congress to get this done, assuming.
Oh, I am.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I can.
Please.
And to thank you to Senator Hicks for that explanation. I think the committee's on board with the bill draft, and I think Senator Guru's concern is strictly related to who determines terms of leases, recognizing that that's a probably delicate balance between negotiated leases with the Office of State Lands and
So,
the
Mr.
legislature. So what I suggested in my original question was really just to get some more information, maybe from State Lands about that. And perhaps that would be appropriate in another bill draft by Senator Guru addressing that, or a direction in another bill draft directing State Lands to promulgate rules associated with terms of leases, if that's what Senator Guru wants. But I think this is a very unusual term that was put in our active admission, limiting the length of leases. So I think it's prudent that we just eliminate that now for our active admission and evaluate and explore that topic separately from this bill draft. That's my thoughts on it.
So originally I thought I heard you saying you'd like to lay it back and get more information. No?
No, Mr. Chairman, moving the bill, what I was only asking for, and you could close public comment, is if you would entertain opening up public comment. I see the Office of State Lands is here. Perhaps they would be a more suitable party to answer the
Okay.
questions concerning the length of leases in order to answer Senator Guru's questions.
Okay, we have somebody from State Lands here that can come forward and talk about that, please. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jennifer Scoggin, Director of the Office of State Lands and Investments. And I have Jason Crowder with me. He is the Deputy Director. Just sort of as an initial point, we've always understood this language in the active admission to the 10-year limit to be for grazing leases. And in some of the historical documents that I've read, it's my understanding that back in the 1800s, when that 10 years was put in place, it was because there was a concern of folks not allowing grazing leases to be exposed to the market sort of on a consistent basis, that you couldn't just have somebody tying it up for 20, 30, 40 years, that they felt like perhaps more revenue could be generated if they were allowed to revisit the leasing decisions every 10 years. With respect to today, Jason, I'll turn it over to you to talk about sort of how we go about negotiating lease terms in certain situations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Currently, all leasing that we do within the office has a term or a maximum term of time that it can be leased out for, and that's all set in statute right now. The Board of Land Commissioners has further clarified those timeframes within their rules and regulations. And the one that comes to mind right off the bat, since Senator Hicks mentioned cell towers, those are special use leases or commercial type leases. The statute says that that can only be for a maximum of 75 years, that those types of leases can't extend past 75 years. However, the board has reduced that term to just be the economic life of the improvements. That way, the lease doesn't outpace the life of the activity out there. We do renewals a lot because they upgrade those improvements, or they upscale them to a point where they can last longer. But each and every lease that we do has a maximum term set by statute right now, and the board just further clarifies that as far as timing. Another example would be in the oil and gas leases. The statute says there's a primary term of 10 years. The board has reduced that primary term to 5 years, and it's allowed 5 one-year extension increments to get up to that full 10-year term.
Mr. Crowder, speaking hypothetically, if Congress passed this tomorrow, the day after, there'd still be a 10-year limit on agricultural leases in place by law and by regulation.
Mr. Chairman, I can take that if you want. Currently, the statutes provide a limitation on 10 years for a grazing and agricultural lease. And then the rules follow that. So there would have to be work done, if you will, by the legislature to change that 10 years.
So if this were enacted tomorrow, there would still be a 10-year limitation.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
correct. That's my understanding.
Thank you. Other questions from the committee? Go ahead, Senator Grew.
No, Mr. Chairman, I think I got it. I'm just trying, just trying to work this one through in my head about how I hear that, so we set, okay, I guess I do have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
So when these rules are set in law, and then you go back and then work different times, less times, but up to. So that's how you look at that and that's how you work with those. So on your example, 75-year lease on a cell tower. You give me a 75-year lease on a cell tower, but you do it in 5-year increments, say, up to 75 years. Is that how that works?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Guru, the statute provides that we can issue special use leases, which would be the type of lease we would issue for that for up to a term up to 75 years, but no greater. But as the deputy mentioned, we look at the economic life of the project. So a cell tower likely is not going to last 75 years. Jason, what typically is the term that the board then allows for those leases?
Mr. Chairman, those leases are typically anywhere from 35, 40, maybe 45 years, depending on the type of improvements they erect.
Follow up? My
No.
apologies. I just assume everybody's been on cap fin, so that's my bad.
No, I've been on CapFin and
Okay.
and we've talked about this, but about the active admission, but let's just say I have a renewed interest in leases with state lands these days. And so I'm looking at it in a little different way than I used to.
Okay,
For example, with the cell tower lease, did you know that the average cell tower lease is 12 months? And they move from company to company and vastly wild swings in money. So if someone gets a 35-year lease on a cell tower and they can lease it every year for a greater profit, that they can, they can make a sizable profit difference where we never get another bite at the apple for 35 years. Those are the types of things that concern me.
okay.
So that's kind of where I
So
would.
that transcends the.
Well, no, it
the
does.
active
It
admission.
actually speaks to it directly. We say 10-year lease and now it's gonna that's gonna go away and we're gonna set another lease. I think that we should have a very active role in that. So I
And-
think that's a
and-
concern to me.
And are you concerned that we don't, given that the current statute says 10 years?
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Treasurer, welcome.
I know that there are escalator clauses in some of the wind contracts, because we had an escalator clause in that wind project that was over around Laramie. So to the point that Senator Drew was talking to, that some of those provisions are made. I don't believe any of us knew that they were releasing those every year and making a lot more money. But that's something that I think that could be put into any other lease agreements as far as changes of ownership or different things, and some other provision for that, whether the 10-year thing is in here or the 10-year thing is not in here.
Thank you. Questions for the treasurer? So I understand your concern, but your concern would be to the whole bevy of laws and rules and regulations as opposed to a modification to the active admission, I think.
Mr. Chairman, that was my suggestion, that we move this bill out because
Yes.
we have time and we have the Office of State Land here. We can explore an option for Senator DeGroot to bring his own bill draft to address this issue that's not actually before us.
I just want to make sure Senator Grew is satisfied.
Ooh, ooh.
Anything?
An elusive goal, Mr. Chairman, but at this moment, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So what I would ask is if you could prepare a memo for, I'm not sure who's going to be carrying this on the floor. A memo that outlines in bullet points what the statutes provide now in terms of length of lease, terms, escalators, and so forth, because when people see an ag lease 10 years being struck, the same questions will come up on the floor. And then I'm not sure, was it your agency that asked for this, or was it?
Mr. Chairman, no, it was not our agency that asked.
Okay. Do you know, Brian, what was the evolution of the origin of the request for this legislation?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, initially this resolution was an outgrowth of work the Select Committee on Capital Financing Investments did last year. mainly focused on this concept of interest versus earnings. The lease language was an amendment, I believe, that the majority floor leader proposed while CapFin was considering this bill this interim. And the committee adopted that and adopted the resolution with that change to the lease language or proposed change.
Okay, so originally it didn't even address the 10 years. It addressed just swapping interest for earnings.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay. And then in your memo, do you feel comfortable addressing the difference between interest and earnings and what impact that may have?
Mr. Chairman, that's not really our
Okay.
bailiwick, if you will, but we're
That-
happy to address the other issues.
Okay, thank you. Might we ask the treasurer's office, Matt, for something on that for the floor presentation? Because I know it's some significant dollars there.
The difference comes, Mr. Chairman, and I'll give you an example that we can do interest, dividends, and realized capital gains right now. But when it comes to the definitions that we have in these statutes that the constitutional amendments, they need to be changed from the standpoint that if we're gonna say we made 10% on $100 million, but we needed $100 million to put into the spending policy, that we'd have to sell $1 billion if we were making 10% to get the $100 million in there if we were selling assets. If this is changed to where we want to have it, then rather than income and it was earnings, then you could actually sell $100 million to generate the $100 million. So those take constitutional amendments. There's other ways to get around it. You could make your reserve funds an endowment class, and you could actually treat them as an endowment if the structure was right. So there's other ways to get around it, but I think this is a prudent measure to go ahead with this and change the active admissions and let the legislative process function as it has in other states.
Thank you. I infer from what you're saying that in addition to an amendment to the act of admission, we need an amendment to our own constitution.
Yes, this is just the first step in the area of the educational fund, not in the
Okay.
area of the PMTF. That can be changed in absence of any of the land funds, but any of the permanent land funds, the active admission ties back to this language.
Okay, thank you. So this is not just the Common School Public Land Fund?
I think the other funds, as far as the funds that the permanent land fund, that's for the different state institutions around the state that are supported by land also, I think they bear the same mark as
Okay.
the educational fund.
All right. Any further questions from the committee? Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, while we're changing this, I'm on page 6, the bottom of the page, line 23. It says none of said land shall be sold for less than $10 per acre. I wonder if we ought to be updating that to a little higher number. It looks to me like a guy could get a bargain on some state land if he offered 12.
Well, I think we sold anything for anywhere near $10.
Oh, no. No way.
Mr. Chairman, no, not to my knowledge. State lands anywhere are usually sold at public auction, and they definitely go, there's a minimum, if you will. And I don't know of a time we've sold for $10 per acre. Do you, Jason?
Yeah, I suppose it's just an artifact of an earlier, humbler age that
Yeah.
can be amended out if you wish.
Yeah, 1890. Yeah. It's me like there's a little bit needs updated there too. If we're updating this thing.
Well, it's concerned, did you want to bring, when we work the bill, we can talk about an amendment.
Yeah.
Okay, anything further in terms of public comment? Agencies? All right, thank you all very much. Greatly appreciated. All right, we'll close agency and public comment again to the committee. Question on the bill, please call the roll.
Senator Anderson,
Aye.
Senator Guru.
Aye.
Senator Nethercott, Senator Salazar, and Chairman Kinsky.
Aye.
5 ayes.
Okay, there be no further business. I'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much. Let me know when the recorder's off.
And then we leave this packet.
Yeah.
We can take these.
Jim, we're gonna have